everyone, welcome to another video on Novara Media, because they are one of the worst political channels on this hell site we call YouTube. And today I just decided to go through a quick 10-minute video they decided to do where they are saying that Jacob Rees-Mogg is cancelling critics of the government. And given that free speech is a massive issue on this channel, I thought this video would be a good springboard to explain why commies are completely wrong every time they talk about free speech. The main reason being that they don't believe in free speech. So let's find out what they had to say.
The Tories have positioned themselves as the last champions of free speech.
Well, at least they're getting something right, though they seem to be doing actually very little about the issue of free speech. Outside of education secretaries telling universities that they shouldn't be cancelling or no platforming guest speakers, nothing has been done about the Malicious Communications Act. And just the other week, a veteran was arrested for posting a pride flag that was in the shape of a swastika on Facebook. So the Tories at the moment on free speech are just typically giving a lot of good intentions and speeches on it, while actually not doing that much about it.
They've condemned everyone from universities to the BBC for engaging in cancel culture.
See, exactly, that's what I mean. They're not doing nothing, but they are doing the bare minimum.
Insisting instead that people should be allowed to speak in those spaces no matter what their views.
Again, that's not quite the argument of cancel culture. Cancel culture is a big umbrella term, and when it comes to no platforming, what the issue is that you essentially have two parties that are perfectly amicable and have agreed that one person can use that platform to speak about an agreed subject, and then a third party of protesters and activists do not like that and try and do everything in their power to signal to, say, the BBC or the university that they do not like this, and that worse things will happen if they are not deplatformed. That's where the issue comes in. And it should not be up to third parties about what can and can't be censored. That is the issue.
And no Tory has made his views on this topic better known than Brexit Opportunities Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg. Here he is stating his views in the Commons.
Freedom of speech is fundamental to how our society operates. Democracy, the rule of law, freedom of speech and the rights of property are the four pillars on which our constitution is built, and a constitution that has thrived through the centuries. If you take away freedom of speech, then you undermine all the other pillars that have supported our constitution. It is a requirement in state-funded schools to teach a broad and balanced curriculum that promotes the spiritual, moral, cultural, mental and physical development of pupils at schools. And this must be done in a way that encourages freedom of speech. And the key to that is that we all have to accept the right of people to express views that not only that we don't like, but on occasions we even find offensive. If we only accept views that we like and find unchallenging, then there is no freedom of speech.
I'll just let that play on because Jacob Rees-Mogg is excellent at getting this salient point across. Without free speech, society cannot function and cannot progress in a sensible way. And if you undermine free speech, you undermine absolutely every single other part of our constitution. Because how are you supposed to properly engage with anything in the world if you cannot even speak your mind freely?
So, we all have to accept the right of people to say things that we don't like, and even to say things that we find offensive. Otherwise, I guess we're free speech hating snowflakes.
Yes, people should be allowed to say whatever is on their mind.
Imagine my surprise then when I read in The Telegraph, Jacob Rees-Mogg tells civil servants to trawl social media to weed out extremist guests.
Yes, indeed, that is an interesting headline. And I'm sure there is a lot more context to this article than is being given off with these initial reactions. Because believe it or not, when the government has entire departments dedicated to anti-extremism, yeah, I'm not that surprised that they are then told in the Home Office and other places to make sure that they don't bring any extremists into Whitehall.
In the subclause, new Cabinet Office rules also urge ministers to check the profiles of visitors taking part in learning and development events.
Yeah, it seems sensible to vet the people who are going to be teaching things in the government departments. That seems very reasonable to me.
The Telegraph goes on to say,
Alright audience, I'm going to be really nice to you and not have you constantly have to listen to this moron speak for the whole time, so I'm going to do the Telegraph reading from now on. New Cabinet Office rules introduced last week also urge managers to carefully check the profiles of visitors taking part in learning and development events, including for criticisms of government policy. Now that's where I have an issue. I can't seem to find a source on exactly what these new guidelines exactly say, But if you're not allowing people to come in based on criticisms of government policy, then obviously I don't agree with that. Or if it's checking profiles for blatant, say, racism, calls for violence, calls for any other illegal activity, calls for undermining the British people in any way, then yes, I can get behind not allowing those people into the Home Office, especially to give learning and development lectures. The new vetting process involves looking at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn posts from the past 3 to 5 years to find potentially problematic or controversial material that may contravene civil service values. Now again, what civil service values are exactly is hard to say without seeing the proper material. Because from people I know in the civil service, they are leftist morons. But then when I've been given details about civil service jobs and their values there, generally what they say is that you have to be politically impartial when doing the job. Even though clearly a lot of the time they are absolutely not. Every single person I know in the civil service absolutely hates the Tory government. So I have no idea what civil service values are. And that is my main problem with all this. Though as I say, I'm not against not allowing certain people to host learning and development events in the civil service for, say, being anti-British, racist, doing illegal stuff, whatever. That's fine. As a British government, you should be having pro-British people in, not anti-British people. That would be ridiculous.
5 years? So suddenly people who once criticised the government half a decade ago are dangerous extremists who can't be allowed near civil servants.
Well, this is the problem. There doesn't seem to be a source on exactly what these guidelines are, and I don't think that these guidelines are saying that if you criticise government policy, you are necessarily an extremist. But obviously Novara Media's Michael Walker has a very small brain, and so does make that comparison like an idiot.
And the Telegraph give some examples. Priya Gopal is Professor of Postcolonial Studies at Cambridge University. As a world-renowned expert on colonialism and its history, you'd think she'd be considered an expert rather than an extremist.
Oh my god, it's the woman from my most popular video ever. Yeah, no, I'm absolutely on the side of calling this professor a racist and extremist. She made out a tweet saying that white lives don't matter and that we need to abolish whiteness. Now, if you wanted to be very, very uncharitable, you could say that this is a call for genocide. I'm a little bit more charitable than that, and will instead just say that she is a complete idiot. One that has essentially made it her life's work to try and completely undermine Britain as much as she can, because she, obviously, an Indian woman, and Indian people seem to either love Britain or hate Britain. There seems to be absolutely no in between. So why on earth would the British government then allow her, and pay her, by the way, to give a learning and development speech which is going to undermine Britain? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever for the British government to do.
No. In October, she was disinvited from giving a speech to civil servants at the Home Office because she criticised Priti Patel over her racist immigration policies.
Exactly which policies was she criticising here? I would love to know.
Gopal had tweeted this. Priti Patel is also a reminder that many Asians in British Africa had ferociously anti-black attitudes and were used by colonial administrations to keep black populations in their place, an attitude she brings to government.
Oh, so she was just throwing out random accusations about the Home Secretary, right. And was also implying that because she is descended from Asians in Uganda, that means that she must hold anti-black racist tendencies implicitly. Yeah, I'm not surprised that the government has second thoughts about paying her for a learning development event. I cannot believe that. This is making the government seem competent.
Now, I potentially wouldn't have tweeted that, but this is someone who's of South Asian heritage, and the whole point Rees-Mogg was making is that even if you are offended by this, that shouldn't matter. She has the right to offend you.
Yeah. No one is saying that she should delete that tweet. Okay, no. She should delete that tweet because it's stupid. But no one is saying that she should be compelled by law to delete that tweet. But look, an equivalent would be that if I'm going to be hired for a company and the guy interviewing me thinks I'm great and everything like that, and I have no problem with me working with him, but then one of his bosses gets very offended because I say that I think all people coming across on the channel should be sent straight back because they're all racist murderers or something like that, then yeah, I wouldn't be that surprised if I don't get that job. But there's been absolutely no third party here that has come in and pressurised the government to do this. This has been ministers' decision to make sure that anti-British sentiments aren't constantly being pushed into Whitehall, because I think they've realised that they have enough of that from the civil servants.
Next is Afua Hirsch. She is a writer and broadcaster. She was also invited to speak to civil servants at an undisclosed government department in 2021.
God, was it about how to abolish whiteness in Whitehall or something like that? Bloody hell, what was she going to talk about?
But it never happened. The Times reports on this one. They say,
Hirsch said that she was dropped at short notice earlier this year by a government department for having a place in the New York Times about racism in Britain, which it felt painted Britain in a bad light. She had written that there was a deep correlation between race and privilege in Britain. The relatively few people of colour, and even fewer if you count only those who have African heritage, who rise to prominent success and prosperity in Britain, are often told we should be grateful or told to leave if we don't like it here, she stated. Hirsch has accused the Prime Minister of a litany of racist statements. Again, just complete false accusations towards people in government. Is it any wonder that the government don't want her involved there and don't want to pay her money for her services, because she is clearly not only anti-British, but anti-government? Why would a government pay someone to undermine them? That is mental. That is just shooting yourself in the foot. And there is absolutely no reason whatsoever that the government shouldn't be doing this.
Taking this argument on its own terms, at face value, which is to say this really is about freedom of speech, you can see the contradictions and the absurdity.
Yes, only if you're a total moron who doesn't understand the freedom of speech argument. No one has faced jail time, no one has been arrested. All that has happened is the organisers, for an event, under their own influence, decided to disinvite these people for undermining what the government and civil service stand for. Given that these are the examples that they are standing for, I think civil service values are actually closer to mine than I would have thought. But of course, no matter how many diversity hires say differently, I am on a completely different set of principles to Ash Sarkar, one that involves freedom of speech, while hers is just entirely about having power.
Because we've ended up in a really weird position where we think the right to freedom of speech really only applies to what could be deemed acts of hate speech, whether that's transphobia or your right to call the corner shop a shop.
I am definitely bleeping that out, and I am keeping it bleeped. That definitely breaks the Malicious Communications Act. That particular word is definitely one that will get people in jail. And yet Ash Sarkar is just here saying it out. Now, I am on your side, Ash. I think that you should absolutely be able to say that without any consequence legally. But if a Pakistani man heard you say that and owns a shop, I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't want your business. That is fine. This is what you are misunderstanding here. That it should be down to the two people who are in the business transaction. And the people with the brain of 2-year-olds who are outside protesting, saying you shouldn't be able to hear what people like, I don't know, Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Jermaine Greer, or even Jacob Rees-Mogg has been protested against. It should not be up to third parties what happens here. All that has happened here with this particular instance is the government appears to have fully decided to stop letting explicitly anti-British people give learning and development events, because they don't want the civil service to be even more anti-British than they already are.
Something like that. That's what we define as contentious but lawful and should be free speech.
Yes, it should be, but it's still technically not, as shown by the fact that the veteran the other week was arrested for posting up the swastika pride flag.
And yet, when we think about free speech as it was actually first formulated by 18th and 19th century political philosophers, free speech in order to criticize a state, because that's, of course, what the First Amendment right is intended to do. It's a bulwark against tyranny. That is something that we're more than happy to throw out of the window.
The government is not stopping any of these people from criticising the government. This is not what they are doing. What the government and civil service is doing with these new measures is making sure that when you come to a government department to give a learning and development event, you will not be giving learning and development events that are going to be undermining the government, because the civil service should absolutely not be trying to undermine the government. This is so stupid. I mean, honestly, if this was a government that said that the dreaded TR, whose name I can't say, but if the government had banned him for being an extremist, Ash Sarkar would be like, oh my god, this government's done something really good. It's just complete tribalism for Ash, and it's very annoying that she can't see that, but go off, Queen. Let's see how little you understand free speech.
And to think about how this happened, I think, is really important because I think that one of the things that the Conservatives have understood is that you can weaponize a kind of resentment at the journey towards social equality that minorities in this country have taken. This idea of, hang on, the language that I once used 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago is no longer acceptable. You can weaponize that kind of resentment and discomfort and say this is because fundamentally your rights are under attack.
Oh my god, this is amazing. She's literally just taken the argument from the freedom of speeches and completely botched it. Well, not even botched it, it's just not entirely applicable here. But yes, debates that were being had decades ago are now ones that are seen as racist, transphobic, homophobic, whatever today. I mean, for God's sake, gay marriage only became legal in the UK about 8 years ago, and you even question whether that was a good decision or not. Yeah, that is seen by a lot of people as problematic, and you are instantly called a homophobe. Yet news just comes out that the government disinvited 2 people who are clearly anti-white racists and anti-British, who, guess what, the British government are supposed to represent. All of a sudden, Ash seems to think that she can take all these arguments that she has said does not matter in the past. They are bad arguments and they don't apply. Although they do in this case because it's for social equality of minorities, rather than, the speech for everyone.
And we are the only ones who are going to protect you. So it's not really about freedom of speech at all. It's about freedom and power to get other people to shut up and stop making you uncomfortable.
Incredible. Yeah, coercion of people to stop saying something is going against freedom of speech. That has been the right and, I guess, freedom of speech centrist point for decades. But these 2 learning and development events that literally no one knew was happening, all of a sudden they don't happen. It's bigger than all these cancelled people from universities. It's way bigger than J.K. Rowling. I mean, it was always going to be a absolute stellar take from Ash. This is what she tweeted after Salman Rushdie was stabbed on stage. Don't have anything particularly clear-headed to say, which to be fair is Ash all the time, but the stabbing of Salman Rushdie, though it has decades-old origins, alongside the campaign of threats and intimidation against drag queens in the US, makes it feel like a very grim, dangerous time for artistic expression. Yes, Ash is the sort of person who equivocates a man being stabbed on stage for standing up against the regime of, well, all Islamist regimes basically, but especially the one in Iran, that is apparently equivalent of a lot of parents and a lot of right-wingers saying, man, these drag time story hours are really creepy, and they should definitely stop because there seems to be a lot of groomed kids here. It's always the amazing thing, and it's why I turned more to the right wing, because when left-wingers try and say, oh, we need to protect X, Y, Z things, it's always these weird categories, almost spiritual categories, as the video I went through the other day said. I can't even really describe what these categories are. Oh, we need to protect women. What's a woman? It's when you express feminine energy, which apparently can be anything. Oh, we need to protect black people. Oh, not that guy, he's an Uncle Tom. Whereas with the right wing, it's always been very obvious what these categories are and what they are trying to protect them for, and the protection always seems to make a lot more sense. In this case, it's don't let kids be involved with adult entertainers, because adult entertainers are specifically there to entertain adults, and it's obviously something that is completely inappropriate for kids. So yeah, basically Ash Sarkar's a moron, but she even admitted it herself, so happy days.
So, really, this isn't a form of hypocrisy or a double standard at all. This is a single standard. It's a way of making sure only a few people are able to define what speech is and retaining the ability to clamp down on forms of political expression which threaten the powers that be in this country. So, not hypocrisy, not a double standard, just the one standard. And it's a cynical one.
I'm so confused by that. Is she basically saying that there's actually the same standard for the left wing and right wing here? Because if that's the case, you could technically say there that Ash Sarkar has just equivocated Afua Hirsch and the dreaded TR, whose name I can't say. Which, if she is saying, then that is still completely stupid, because the dreaded TR doesn't hold any particular hate for anyone apart from the people who have actually done crimes. Afua Hirsch and Priyamvada Gopal both seem to be explicitly racist to white people. not even seems to be, just are. And of course, to Brits. And as I am going to say to death in this video, if you are a government that is supposed to represent the British people, you of course aren't going to want people who are explicitly anti-British to be doing learning and development events for your employees. It just makes sense.
I want to show you one example of the amazing cognitive dissonance that infects the right.
Well, I suppose you just showed Ash Sarkar showing us cognitive dissonance of the left, so at least you're being impartial.
On Friday, author Salman Rushdie was stabbed in New York. It was a terrible crime, and Rushdie is likely to suffer life-changing injuries.
My lord, where the hell is this going? What's this got to have to do with the right?
In response to the appalling attack, Guido Fawkes tweeted this. So it's a picture of Salman Rushdie with the quote, "What is freedom of expression without the freedom to offend? It ceases to exist."
Seems really consistent with everything I've seen from the right wing. Where are you going with this?
Understandable thing to tweet in that context. But then the very next thing they tweeted, the very next one, was this comment on the new Rees-Mogg policy. So there was a tweet from a journalist explaining the government are being told to look back 5 years of their social media content before they're allowed to speak to the civil service. And Guido Fawkes says, "Good to see another long-advocated Guido policy initiative being implemented."
Oh, so it's just Guido Fawkes saying that, it might be a good idea for the government to stop inviting anti-British people to the British government for learning and development events. And then they did it. Right, okay. Again, this isn't... This is so stupid. This isn't Guido Fawkes saying that these people shouldn't be allowed to say what they're saying. It is saying that the government should think twice before allowing anti-British people into the British government to teach the British government employees things that are anti-British. Especially if they are people that throw out completely unfounded and untrue accusations about government ministers. If you are at all trying to conflate this in any way with Salman Rushdie being stabbed, you are a complete moron. Well, it's Novara Media, and that's what I always say about them.
Now, of course, we should say, being disinvited to speak to the civil service is very, very different being stabbed in the neck because someone didn't like a book you wrote.
I think it was a bit more than just because he didn't like the book, but at least you are saying that there is a difference here. Thank God for that.
But still, I mean, I think Guido Fawkes, if there is anyone in public life who is more, well, hypocritical on their own terms, I kind of agree with you, Ash, that it's not hypocritical if you're talking about what they really mean, which is you can't criticize the powerful.
I mean, I do agree with Novara Media when they say you should be able to criticize government policy, but from what I can tell, none of the disinvited speakers have been disinvited for criticising government policy. It was for throwing out absolutely unfounded accusations against the government ministers.
But on their own terms, which is to say freedom of speech is absolute, it's important, you should be allowed to offend people unless you've said something that offends me, which...
They won't be able to find a single example of where someone hasn't got this job for being offensive. And they also won't find any right-wing free speech advocates saying that they should be locked away, deported, thrown in jail, whatever, for anything they've said. This is why you need to see the world beyond just power politics and socialism. It makes you dedicate a channel to total nonsense, and then the whole time everything you do is completely against everything you say you advocate for.
Seems to be where Guido are coming from, doesn't it, Ash?
Well, absolutely. And if you want to maybe make a much more direct comparison, let's say, for instance, a university had invited Priti Patel to address the students, and the students lodged a protest and said, "We don't want her to come and address us." I'm sure that Guido Fawkes would come down on a very, very different side on whether or not disinviting somebody because of the politics that they hold does or does not constitute a threat to freedom of speech.
I mean, finally they make a fairly good comparison. It only took 8 minutes, but yes, this is something that is worth addressing. And its context again. Universities are a big core of this argument, mainly because universities are supposed to be a place that is the pinnacle of free thought. And with that, of course, needs to come free speech. When it comes to the civil service and the government, it's not so much the case. They are public bodies that are working in the interest of the British people, and they are there to implement policies. To an extent, it makes sense to not invite people who are critical of those policies because it undermines the work of Whitehall and the civil service and the government. And there is, of course, nothing wrong with criticising it outside of Whitehall, on Twitter, on the news, wherever. But then if you've spent the last 5 years of your life saying some of the worst things that I can think of against white people in the British and our culture, history, and all that, then it makes sense that if you are supposed to be representing these people, you wouldn't invite these people to teach your workers. I keep making this point to death. Now, at a university, thought is a lot more free than that. And universities will have a standard where you can't have people coming in advocating for deaths, killings, other illegal activity, anything like that. But then when they are pressured by their own customers, in this case the students, then of course they're going to do what they can to try and appease them, because universities have no backbone these days. When it comes to the government, they will be listening to multiple sources, news organisations, think tanks, different things like that for different policies to implement, and different codes of conduct to implement in the civil service. Guido Fawkes happened to be one of these people that is in contact with the government suggesting policies. This is one that happened to go through. Now, if it was a university and they were taking advice from media outlets, say, or different types of think tanks, whatever the equivalent is for them, this would be a different issue. People would be saying these are very silly policies, these are very silly think tanks, the universities should stop listening to them. And then you'd get pressure from the other side, trying to get them to stop implementing that policy, and even trying to say, hey, don't listen to those guys, they're idiots. And that's fine, this is how businesses and public bodies work. But again, with a university, it's a bit different. A university is supposed to be a platform that the students can go into these lecture halls and listen to whatever societies have put on whatever events or speakers. And if they have pressure to stop that, that is completely different. You have stopped these students who have organised this from listening to the event that they put money into. With the civil service, all they are doing is not paying these people for a service that they don't want. It's the people in charge making the decisions, not from pressure from the outside, although there is a bit of influence from the outside, obviously, but you're never going to stop that. With universities, it's entirely pressure from students who are not part of these student societies or bodies that have put on this event. It's a different issue. But as I say, I can see the similarities, and that's why I just spent about 5 minutes addressing it.
So I think that we don't have to even try and compare the violent assault on Salman Rushdie to their view of civil servants who might hold challengingly progressive views.
I also wouldn't make another comparison about that because your first one was really stupid on Twitter. But at least we can all agree that stabbing someone for their views is bad, I suppose.
You just have to look at how the folks at Guido Fawkes have responded to university campus culture kind of moral outrages.
Again, though, that is people protesting a public forum. This is the civil service no longer having learning and development events from certain people for being anti-British and seeming to making it their life's work to completely undermine the country they represent. Completely different issue.
Again, the Salman Rushdie thing, what that points to is that there are various ways in which we can understand what happened. One way, and this is one way which is particularly favoured by the media establishment in this country, is to say that, well, this shows you just how uniquely barbarous Islam is.
I have got literally no idea what her examples of that would be. I can only imagine it's from the Express and Daily Mail. Though it does make me laugh every time that Ash Sarkar says the media establishment as if it's her enemy, when she gets invited on the BBC, or at least used to, pretty much every week. She doesn't seem to realise that she is actually part of the media establishment. But I suppose if she said she was part of the media establishment, she couldn't LARP as a oppressed minority. So, there you go.
There's another way in which you can look at this, which is the fatwa is an edict which is issued by a state. It's a way in which a state, using religion, is able to say this person doesn't have a right to live.
Sure, that's a fine way to put a fatwa into other words.
Now, obviously, there is nothing quite as extreme as that in a Western context, but there are plenty of instances where Western states set people up and go, you, either as an individual or you as a demographic, you're public enemy number one.
Well, yes, I did see what happened to the dreaded TR. I mean, honestly, again, they keep trying to say, oh, Salman Rushdie being stabbed. Yeah, it's not exactly comparable, but then they keep making the comparison. And at this point, they really do just have to stop. You needed to mention it once, that was it. But now they are basically saying that the state is using their power to try and silence people. The thing is that the state is using their internal power. It's within the state. This has nothing to do outside of the state. These people, everyone who is disinvited is free to say all the stuff they were saying. They are completely free to say that. The government just won't allow them in for learning and development events. Completely different to what Ash Sarkar, I think, is about to say.
And it creates a context in which harm is much more likely to come to them. And so I think that this is a really important context in which to understand the attack on Salman Rushdie.
Again, she's still talking about Salman Rushdie. I thought she was going to try and make a comparison to what's happened with the civil service here, but she isn't. So I don't know what a comparison is. I am literally just lost at what she is saying. I think she's making a word salad so she can try and make this comparison without sounding like an idiot. But this is the really good thing about being able to pause this and dissect each and every sentence.
Is that it was a form of state brutality where the state is able to create an environment in which acts of violence are more likely, and a way in which the state uses that capacity to mobilize the violence of others in order to clamp down on free expression.
Are you still talking about the fatwa? Because it sounded like you were moving away from that point, but you still seem to be on it. Yeah, unbelievably, if a state says they're going to pay someone $4 million to kill someone, people are going to try and kill them. What's this got to do with what's happened with the Jacob Rees-Mogg's directive?
And so then when you see it as a form of state power, in this instance, Iranian state power, you would then be a lot less casual about the British state determining the boundaries of free speech and determining that criticism of the government is an unacceptable form of free speech.
Oh my god, you are actually an idiot. See what I mean? She did exactly as I said. She was making a word salad to try and make the comparison that the British state is basically doing what the Iranian state did, only not paying someone to kill these people. Ash, who the hell is supposed to set the boundaries of what can be said within Whitehall, a government body, aside from the government? Who the hell is supposed to do that? Of course it's the government that set the boundaries on free speech. They have the monopoly on power and violence. That is the point. And so free speech advocates are saying, right, just let people say what they want. They should be free to speak. Within government, though, obviously they set their own rules when it comes to the civil service, as any private company would. Obviously, if you are a civil servant worker and you constantly say all Tories are scum or something along those lines, obviously you're not going to have a job for very long if you're working for a Tory government because, again, you're supposed to be impartial. I know this because I not only know civil servants in there, but when I've had my own experience with the civil service, that is what they have told me they have to be like. They have to be completely politically impartial and implement whatever the ministers and other senior civil servants want. This doesn't mean you can't criticise the government full stop. This means you can't criticise the government, and to the extent we've seen, it's not even criticising the government, it's just falsely accusing certain ministers of certain things. Then you can't spread your BS within the government. And that makes complete sense. So all this talk of Salman Rushdie has just made you seem like complete morons, but we already knew that because I've covered enough of your videos. But it was a good springboard to talk about free speech once again. It's been an issue I've not really touched upon too much outside of big events when it happens, but this one really was a good argument. I have forgotten how stupid leftists can be when it comes to very simple principles. But anyway, that's all I had for you today. So as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.